Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. In 2025, the United States stands at the edge of an economic precipice. The national debt has soared to an unprecedented $37 trillion, a figure that looms over every financial decision and stirs deep anxiety across the country. Investors watch the markets with growing unease as volatility becomes the new normal and headlines warn of potential crises. This mounting debt is not just a number, it's a shadow that influences policy, business, and the daily lives of millions of Americans. The uncertainty it brings has fueled a wave of economic nationalism and aggressive trade policies as leaders scramble to protect domestic interests in an increasingly unpredictable world. The Trump administration's push for economic nationalism has reshaped America's approach to global trade. Tariffs now target foreign competitors, with the stated goal of protecting American jobs and reviving domestic manufacturing. While some industries cheer these moves, others warn of rising costs and shrinking export markets. The world is watching as the U.S. flexes its economic muscle, but the response has been swift and fierce. Global partners have retaliated with their own tariffs, igniting a trade war that threatens to spiral out of control. Tensions with Canada and Mexico, America's closest neighbors and trading partners, have reached a boiling point. Disputes over dairy, steel, and even border security have led to threats of steep tariffs and countermeasures. What were once routine negotiations have become high-stakes confrontations, with both sides digging in and public protests erupting at border crossings. These aggressive moves have strained long-standing alliances, turning stable partnerships into volatile, unpredictable negotiations. Diplomats now approach the bargaining table with caution, knowing that a single misstep could trigger economic chaos and disrupt supply chains that have taken decades to build. For businesses that depend on cross-border trade, the uncertainty is paralyzing. Small manufacturers and large corporations alike find themselves unable to plan for the future, as the threat of sudden tariffs or regulatory changes hangs over every transaction. Many are already feeling the pinch, with shipments delayed, costs rising, and customers left in limbo. Even the shared US-Canada electrical grid, a symbol of decades of cooperation and mutual benefit, has become a bargaining chip in this escalating standoff. Energy flows that once crossed borders seamlessly are now subject to political gamesmanship, raising concerns about reliability and the future of North American energy security. The result is a continent-wide sense of instability. Economic warfare now overshadows decades of trust and collaboration, leaving ordinary citizens, business owners, and policymakers alike to wonder what the next day will bring. The ripple effects are felt in every sector, from agriculture to technology, as uncertainty becomes the only constant. The stage is set for a dramatic showdown. With the fate of North American trade and energy hanging in the balance, every decision made in the coming months will shape the continent's economic future for years to come. In early 2025, US-Canada trade tensions exploded as President Trump threatened sweeping tariffs on Canadian dairy and lumber. The administration linked trade penalties to Canada's efforts to curb fentanyl trafficking, escalating the dispute beyond economics. Canada, heavily reliant on US trade, faced the threat of recession as tariffs doubled on aluminum and steel, reaching 50%. The Canadian government, feeling cornered, considered unprecedented retaliation. Public outrage surged, uniting Canadians against what they saw as predatory US tactics. Ontario, the industrial heartland, prepared a bold countermove, targeting the shared electricity grid. The trade war had crossed a line, with critical infrastructure now in the crosshairs. The stage was set for a confrontation that could disrupt daily life on both sides of the border. Ontario Premier Doug Ford stunned North America with a move that few saw coming, sending shockwaves through both political and economic circles. In a bold and unprecedented response to newly imposed US tariffs, Ford threatened to weaponize Ontario's electricity exports, an essential resource for several American states. Almost overnight, Ontario slapped a hefty 25% surcharge on power sold to New York, Minnesota, and Michigan. For millions of Americans, this meant a sudden spike in their monthly electricity bills, with families and businesses scrambling to adjust. Ford's message was unmistakable. If the U.S. escalated the trade war, Ontario would not hesitate to cut off electricity exports entirely, leaving its neighbors in the dark. This was far from an empty threat. Ontario's power is a lifeline for several U.S. states, powering homes, hospitals, and industries across the border. The risk was real. Entire regions could face rolling blackouts, plunging cities into darkness and disrupting daily life. What began as a trade dispute now threatened to spiral into a full-blown energy crisis. Ford was betting that the looming threat of blackouts would force the U.S. government to the negotiating table, hoping the fear of widespread outages would outweigh the desire to maintain tariffs. Around the world, governments and analysts watched in disbelief. Decades of cross-border energy cooperation, once seen as unbreakable, now hung by a thread. The situation marked a dangerous new era, where vital infrastructure, once a symbol of partnership, was now being wielded as a weapon in international disputes. The stakes for the US-Canada alliance had never been higher. Centuries of friendship and trade were suddenly at risk, with both sides facing enormous pressure to find a solution. Behind closed doors, diplomats scrambled to contain the fallout. Every phone call, every meeting, carried the weight of knowing that a single misstep could trigger irreversible consequences for millions. As the world watched the crisis unfold, ordinary citizens on both sides of the border braced for impact, realizing that this conflict had grown far beyond tariffs and trade. It now threatened the very fabric of daily life. The blackout threat exposed the deep integration of the US-Canada electrical grid, a marvel of cross-border engineering. This vast network, stretching thousands of miles, is the result of decades of collaboration, innovation, and trust between two neighboring nations. It's not just wires and towers, it's a living system, pulsing with the energy that powers millions of lives on both sides of the border. Over 30 transmission lines link the two nations, allowing power to flow seamlessly in both directions. These connections form a critical backbone, enabling regions to share resources, balance supply and demand, and respond quickly to emergencies. When one area faces a shortage, another can step in, making the grid more flexible and robust. Canada, especially Ontario and Quebec, is a major net exporter, supplying enough electricity to power millions of American homes. Hydroelectric plants in these provinces generate clean, renewable energy, which is sent south to fuel bustling cities and rural communities alike. This partnership has helped the U.S. reduce its reliance on fossil fuels and lower its carbon footprint. For states like New York and Minnesota, Canadian hydropower is essential, not just for reliability, but for meeting climate goals. These states depend on steady imports to keep their grids stable, especially during peak demand or extreme weather. Without this cross-border flow, their path to a cleaner, greener future would be much steeper. Losing this clean, affordable energy would force a costly shift to fossil fuels. Electricity prices would rise, emissions would spike, and the progress made toward sustainability could be undone. The economic and environmental stakes are high for both countries. The grid's interdependence means disruptions on one side instantly affect the other. A failure in Canada can ripple into the US, and vice versa, causing outages, economic losses, and even jeopardizing public safety. Operators on both sides must coordinate constantly, sharing information and resources to keep the lights on. During heat waves or outages, the shared system keeps lights on and hospitals running. Emergency crews from both countries often work side by side, restoring power and protecting vulnerable communities. This spirit of cooperation has saved lives and prevented disasters. This cooperation has made energy cheaper and more resilient for both countries. Businesses thrive, families enjoy reliable power, and energy markets benefit from stability and competition. The grid is more than infrastructure, it's a shared lifeline. The crisis revealed how fragile this arrangement is when politics intervene. Disputes over trade, policy, or regulation can threaten the delicate balance, putting millions at risk and straining a partnership built over generations. The grid, once a symbol of partnership, had become a potential flashpoint. What was once a quiet success story now stood at the center of national debates and international headlines. The future of North American energy security now hung in the balance. The choices made today will determine whether this grid remains a beacon of cooperation or a source of conflict for generations to come. Ontario's threat to cut electricity exports promised immediate economic pain for U.S. states. Prices would spike as utilities scrambled for costly replacements, hitting households and businesses hard. Manufacturing could grind to a halt, jobs lost, and inflation worsen. Grid reliability would suffer, raising the risk of blackouts and public safety crises. For Canada, the move risked vital export revenue and long-term trust as a reliable energy partner. Both economies faced a lose-lose scenario, with pain ricocheting across the border. The threat underscored how deeply intertwined and vulnerable the two nations had become. The cost of weaponizing energy was clear: everyone would pay. An electricity cutoff would force U.S. states to burn more fossil fuels, spiking emissions and derailing climate goals. Air quality would worsen, and reliance on fracked gas and coal would rise, undoing years of environmental progress. The crisis exposed how clean energy cooperation is essential for both nations' climate ambitions. Disrupting the grid for political gain would sacrifice long-term environmental health for short-term leverage. When diplomacy fails, the planet pays the price. With disaster looming, both governments scrambled to de-escalate. The U.S. paused its steel and aluminum tariffs. Ontario withdrew its electricity surcharge and blackout threat. This mutual stand-down allowed for urgent trade talks to begin. Each side claimed a partial victory, but the crisis had exposed deep fractures. Relief swept through businesses and consumers, but the underlying disputes remained unresolved. The truce was fragile, a pause, not a solution. The speed of escalation was a sobering warning of how quickly cooperation can unravel. The future of U.S.-Canada relations now depended on cooler heads and real compromise. The blackout threat has faded, but trust between the U.S. and Canada is badly shaken. Deep disagreements over trade and tariffs remain, with both sides wary and negotiations tense. Canada watches U.S. talks with Mexico, knowing any deal could set a precedent. The U.S. debt and protectionist policies keep pressure high, while Canada's economic dependence limits its leverage. The power dynamic is clear: the U.S. holds the upper hand, but both risk severe fallout from renewed conflict. Even the most integrated systems, like the energy grid, can become bargaining chips. The memory of Ontario's ultimatum lingers, a warning of how fast things can spiral. As talks resume, the partnership is more brittle than ever. The 2025 trade crisis revealed the dangers of weaponizing interdependence. Every tariff and threat sent shockwaves across the border, harming both nations. The attempt to use the shared grid as leverage risked mutual destruction for short-term gain. The episode underscored the value of cooperation and the perils of letting disputes bleed into critical infrastructure. Essential services should never be bargaining chips. Trust is hard to rebuild once broken. The quick de-escalation showed both sides know they're indispensable partners. The crisis was a wake-up call: shared interests and mutual dependency are too important to jeopardize. The lesson is clear: cooperation, not confrontation, is the only path forward.